Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're talking to Professor Thomas Seyfried. The topic of our conversation will be cancer as a metabolic disease. Professor, would you mind introducing yourself to the Brazilian public, please?
Yes, thank you, Antonio. It's nice to be here. I am Professor Tom Seyfried, professor of biology at Boston College here in the great city of Boston. So I teach undergraduates and graduate students in areas of general biology and cancer biology. So this can give you, I have an active research program as well. We do preclinical studies, improving dosage, timing, and scheduling for various therapies that are immediately or translated directly into the clinic to help people with various cancers.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I want to start today with some background about cancer in general. So I believe that the general knowledge nowadays is that cancer is a genetic disease. Can you explain the fundamental principles of the metabolic theory of cancer and how it is different from the genetic theory?
Yeah, well, I think you're correct. I know from the National Cancer Institute website, they say cancer is a genetic disease, and there are 100 different forms of cancer, and they all have different kinds of genetic mutations, and a lot of that is true. There are many different types of cancers, and if you look at each one of them, they're different from each other, even within the same cancer cell. Even with the hundreds of thousands of cells in a given tumor, if you look at the cells individually, they're all different from each other. This is called the somatic mutation theory of cancer, and the theory states that cancer is dysregulated cell growth, cells that grow out of control. That's what cancer is. And according to the somatic mutation theory, the genetic theory, the dysregulated growth is the effect of the different kinds of mutations that exist in the tumor cells. And people then, based on that overwhelming belief, people then developed personalized medicine or different kinds of approaches, precision medicine, personalized therapy, this kind of stuff, where they're attempting to target different mutations on tumor cells and then hopefully cause the tumor to disappear or potentially cure the cancer, based on the fact that these mutations are playing an important role in the dysregulated growth of this cancer. In the United States today, we have over 1,700 people dying each day from cancer. That's about 70 people an hour. And this is getting worse and worse every year, despite the massive evidence, or a massive effort, I should say, into treating cancer based on the fact that it's a genetic disease. It's not working. It's not working because cancer is not a genetic disease. So let's break it down now and see the other side. All cancers that we have looked at, all major cancers responsible for the great majority of cancers in people, regardless of the country that they happen to be in, all suffer from a common metabolic problem, and that is a deficiency of oxidative-driven energy. So let me explain this a little bit more. You and I are sitting here. You're listening to me. I'm speaking to you. I'm inhaling oxygen from the air. The oxygen from the air is being used as an acceptor for energy efficiency in all of the cells in our body, with the exception of red blood cells. But all the cells in our body are using oxygen to generate energy efficiently. Now, if I were to hold my breath for an extended period of time, or someone were to strangle me, I would start to turn purple, and I would start to die because I'm being blocked of oxygen, and my bloodstream would fill up with lactic acid, which is a waste product of fermentation metabolism. So cells in our body have the capacity to obtain energy for a short period of time using fermentation, which is energy without oxygen. Okay. Another quick way of killing us fast is to drink liquid with cyanide in it. Okay, cyanide is a toxic poison that immediately blocks energy through oxygen. Okay, so now we see how we are living as entities. Now let me tell you something. Cancer cells can live in hypoxia without oxygen, and they are resistant to cyanide. You can pour cyanide on tumor cells, and they don't die. If we take cyanide and drink it, we'll be dead within a minute or two. So what's going on? Why all these cancer cells can live without oxygen, and they are resistant to cyanide? And the answer is they don't use oxygen for energy, they use fermentation. Why do they use fermentation? Because the organelle, the mitochondrion in the cytoplasm of the tumor cell, is dysfunctional. It cannot produce enough energy with oxygen, so it has to rely on fermentation, throwing out lactic acid as a waste product, just as my body would if I were being strangled. I would throw out lactic acid. But the lactic acid, in my case, being strangled, would only be there until I got oxygen back into my system. The cancer cell is locked into a constant fermentation because it has a permanent dysfunction of its respiration. That same organelle controls the division and life cycle of the cell. If that organelle becomes corrupted in any way, the cell relies on fermentation energy and loses growth control and grows in a dysregulated way. Now, it takes quite a while for the cell, a normal cell, to become cancerous. You have to chronically disturb oxygen energy, chronically. It could be years. Eventually, the cell slowly transitions away from respiration to fermentation. And as that transition occurs, the cell loses growth control and starts to grow in a dysregulated way. Meaning, and then for us, it says, well, what are the fuels driving fermentation to allow the cell to be dysregulated in its growth? And we have interrogated all of the different fuels, and only the sugar glucose and the amino acid glutamine are the prime drivers of this dysregulated growth, and the cells cannot transition to fatty acids or ketone bodies. So what I have just told you is the solution to the cancer problem. You transition the whole body to fatty acids and ketones, which the cancer cells can't use, and then you lower the blood sugar and the glutamine simultaneously, thereby starving out the tumor cells. And this works. And then you'll ask me, well, how come nobody in the world is using the therapy that I just described? And the answer is because they think cancer is a genetic disease. That's the answer.
It's a vicious cycle, right?
Is that too complicated for you to understand?
No, I got it completely. And you mentioned that the problem initiates with the mitochondria, right? Of course, initiates with constant glucose, constant sugar being poured into the cells, but then the mitochondria gets damaged, and then the cancer can grow out of control, right?
Yeah.
Is that it?
So the key organelle is the mitochondrion. Chronic mitochondrial dysfunction will lead to an upregulation of fermentation, allowing the cell to escape growth controlling mechanisms because the organelle that controls those is now dysfunctional. So we know, and all cancers are the same. That's another important thing. Breast, colon, brain, all of them are reliant on fermentation for energy. So what does that mean? Cancer is a singular disease of energy abnormality. It's not 100 different diseases. Yes, if you look at it genetically and morphologically, they all look different from each other, just like a liver tissue would look different from a brain tissue, different tissues. And if you look at the mutations, they're all different from each other. But the common underlying characteristic of all cancers is a reliance on fermentation. And those fermentable fuels are the sugar glucose and the amino acid glutamine. Without those two fuels, this tumor cell cannot survive. It cannot transition to fatty acids or ketones. And all other fermentable fuels that would be in the tumor microenvironment are found in very small amounts, not sufficient to keep the dysregulated growth persisting for too long. So you got to have a lot of fuel to keep the dysregulated growth of the cancer cell.
So you put people in your practice in the carnivore or ketogenic diet to treat cancer, is that right?
Well, you have to quantify that. What does that mean? In order to lower blood sugar, you have to transition away from those kinds of diets. So we built the glucose ketone index calculator, which allows all cancer patients to know whether or not they're in therapeutic ketosis. And what that means is the brain and other tissues are now have the opportunity to transition away from glucose and now to ketone bodies and fatty acids, okay? That's step one. Step two is targeting the glutamine. So then we have to design drugs, repurpose drugs, that then go after the glutamine. And that has to be done very, very sensitive. It can't be done aggressively because the glutamine is needed for our immune cells and our gut and our urea cycle. So that amino acid plays a very important role in our normal physiology. So to go after it in the wrong way, you could harm your body. So again, you have to know, number one, lower the blood sugar, transition the body to ketones. Number two, strategically use glutamine targeting drugs to polish off and kill the remaining tumor cells, while maintaining health and vitality of the body. There should be no hair loss. There should be no nausea, no vomiting, none of these kinds of things that you see from traditional therapies. So again, you just have to know what to do and how to do it, and we're writing that up now as we speak.
So your patients do not go to chemotherapy, and do you prescribe, for example, fasting for your patients as well?
Well, first of all, you have to I'm not a physician, so I can't treat anybody.
Okay.
I'm a scientist, okay? I uncover the mechanisms that are driving the dysregulated growth of the tumor cells.
So advising would be the right question.
Yeah. So I can provide knowledge, and then a physician who would understand what I'm saying could then apply this. Now, the question you ask is a very important one. What about chemo and radiation? And the answer is those therapies can be used as adjuncts to metabolic therapy. So we're finding that when a patient is in nutritional ketosis, very little toxic chemo can be used with the same or even greater therapeutic efficacy, thereby significantly reducing the toxic effects of the chemotherapy and possibly radiation. What we do is we shrink tumors down using metabolic therapy, and then a singular beam of radiation could potentially eliminate the tumor completely. For all organ systems, or most except brain, we're not in favor of using any kind of radiation for brain because it frees up large amounts of glucose and glutamine, the two fuels that are driving the dysregulated growth. So we try to avoid any therapy that has a remote chance of elevating blood sugar. And sometimes when people are poisoned and irradiated, the body goes into a shock mode, raising corticosteroids, a natural hormone that elevates blood sugar. It's kind of a fight-flight reaction, and we don't want that. We try to keep the patient in a very homeostatic state, reduce stress, emotional stress, all these kinds of things to keep the blood sugar down. But, we don't throw out all standard of care using metabolic therapy. We use metabolic therapy as the prime treatment and adjunctively use chemo and radiation under certain conditions. And this will be the eventual, let's put it this way, a far better solution to the cancer problem than is currently being done throughout the world. And the reason for that is because cancer is a mitochondrial metabolic disease. It's not a genetic disease. And once people realize, once you're working under the appropriate theory of what the nature of the disease is, then the outcomes will be far greater, optimal, than working under an incorrect theory.
Yep. And is there any key findings in your research that can support that metabolic theory of cancer, Professor, that you could tell us?
Yeah, so I published a big paper recently. It's probably not available to the majority of people in a professional scientific journal. And what we found is that all major cancers accumulate lipid droplets in the cytoplasm, these little fat bodies. They're fatty acid bodies in the cytoplasm. And we were able to show that the accumulation of the fatty acids in the cytoplasm of all these malignant kinds of human cancers is all linked to an abnormality in the number, structure, and function of the mitochondria. So this provides very, very strong evidence saying that all major cancers have a common metabolic problem, human cancers, that they all accumulate these little fat droplets in the cytoplasm as a direct marker. It's telling us right there that these cancer cells cannot use energy through oxygen, and they're accumulating the fatty acids because you need oxygen to burn the fatty acids. You need an oxygen-driven metabolism. So that's a biomarker telling us that these tumor cells, all of the major tumors, are driven by fermentation metabolism. But if you do not understand what I just said, and you think cancer is a genetic disease, I might as well be talking to a plug socket on a wall, because that plug socket could not know any more of what I'm saying than a field that thinks cancer is a genetic disease. So it's again, and there's no clinical trials, there's no studies. And the second piece of evidence is that when cancer patients do metabolic therapy, according to our Press Pulse program, we're seeing many what we call stage 4 or terminal cancer patients living far longer than would have ever been predicted. And the oncologists always are surprised. I don't understand why the oncologists would be surprised. They should say, yes, this is what we would exactly expect if cancer is a mitochondrial metabolic disease. We should see this. They're surprised because the patients aren't dying. If you poison and irradiate people and treat them the wrong way, they often don't survive. And about 50% of people today treated by Western medicine for cancer, about 50% of the cancer patients are killed as the result of the poisonous treatments that they're receiving. I have never seen any cancer patient die from lowering glucose and elevating ketone bodies and putting in a glutamine targeting drug. So we could significantly eliminate indirect death of cancer patients from toxic therapies if metabolic therapy became the standard of care. And it will. It's just a matter of time. I don't know how long it will take. You seem to understand what I'm saying. Is that correct? You understand what I'm saying?
I completely do.
Well, how the hell how do you understand it when 90% of the oncologists have no clue what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's
amazing.
like the carnivore. Yeah, it's like the carnivore diet. I can understand that the carnivore diet would be biological appropriate diet for us as humans, but most people don't understand also. Maybe I'm out of the curve because I'm not a doctor, I'm not a nutritionist. I am a mechanical engineer there, and I am completely interested in how the body works and how nutrition can affect it.
But when you say carnivore, see the problem with diets, carnivore diet, vegan diet, pescatarian diet, Mediterranean diet. You can name all these diets. Some people do well, some people do not do well. What is the mechanism of action by which a carnivore diet might help somebody? And the answer is it probably involves a lot of different things. But we're talking about cancer, and we're trying to figure out what is driving the dysregulated cell growth. That's a different thing. Now, we have had cancer patients do well on carnivore diets, on Mediterranean diets, on vegan diets. We'll put it this way, vegetarian diets, pescatarian diets. See, when you measure your blood glucose and ketones using the glucose ketone index calculator, by a meter, you take a blood drop and you measure your sugar level, and then you measure your ketone level, and you get the ratio, it tells you right off the bat whether you're in nutritional ketosis. And it's the state of nutritional ketosis that puts a lot of pressure on the cancer cells. So yes, you can get in there with a vegan diet, a pesca, but we seem to think carnivore diets seem to bring you into that zone a little faster than, say, a vegetable diet. Pescatarian diets are good if you're eating a fish that has a lot of fat in it. Even proteins, like if you're eating a ribeye steak, which has more fat than, say, a filet mignon, you might get into nutritional ketosis better on a ribeye than a filet mignon. But the idea is we're using a quantitative physiological measure to determine whether or not we're in ketosis. So vegetarians may have to chew up a lot of plants. They might have to be eating all day. And you got to be careful because the plants also can have carbohydrates in them, which can make the decline to but I'm not saying they can't, because I've seen vegetarians get into nutritional ketosis. And that's the key. Nutritional ketosis, measured by the glucose ketone index calculator, can allow anybody to know whether they're in ketosis or not.
So that means that fasting could also be an important component of the metabolic process of curing cancer, right?
Well, it's a process for sure, but as we have learned, it's easier to go zero carbohydrate for 10 to 14 days and then switch to water-only fasting for several days, rather than trying to go cold turkey. Cold turkey is someone who would just, okay, I'm eating a steak with potatoes and bread and vegetables, and then the next day I'm not going to eat anything. I'm just going to drink water for the next 5 days. Well, you're going to go through withdrawal symptoms, just as powerful in some cases as withdrawing from nicotine or alcohol or a drug. Your body goes through a withdrawal. Our brains are addicted to glucose, and when we break this linkage, we have this feeling of malaise. We don't feel good. We're anxious. We have many of the same characteristics as trying to withdraw from nicotine or alcohol or something along these lines. So if you go a zero carbohydrate diet for 10 to 14 days, your body adjusts better to the absence of carbohydrates slowly and more physiologically. And then you can do water-only fasting if that becomes necessary. But we're seeing that combinations of intermittent fasting, water-only fasting, zero carb or very, very low carbohydrate. Yes, carnivore diets can do this for you, for sure. And then each patient must know for themselves what works best for them. There's no general trend here. What works for you may not work for me. So each person must measure their own glucose ketone index and learn what they can or cannot eat. And then, of course, once the patient is in the cancer patient, of course, is in nutritional ketosis, then we bring on specific drugs that go after the glutamine issue. And then we can, like some of these parasite medications and things like this. None of this stuff is very costly. It's a very low-cost, highly effective, non-toxic therapeutic strategy for managing cancer, based on our clear understanding of the theory that drives the dysregulated growth, which all started with Otto Warburg. But we since have moved Otto Warburg's understanding to a new level of understanding, thereby adapting it directly to the clinic.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, Professor. One question that I do have is that are there any kinds of cancer that respond very well to the metabolic therapies, but some do not? Do they just respond all the same?
No, you're right. Some respond much better. It depends on the level of motivation and understanding, because sometimes we find out that some people don't understand the difference between a low carbohydrate diet and a zero carbohydrate diet. Some people don't recognize that some foods have a lot more available carbohydrates than other foods. So, and then of course, for cancer patients, now, a young guy like you, you have no trouble getting into. How old are you? How old are you?
I'm 25.
Oh, you'll get in there real quick. My students, all the young folks get in there. The old guys are like me and others. Our brains are more geared, for traditional foods and things like this. Like anything, young people seem to adopt faster than older people. But if you're under cancer therapy treatment, it's sometimes much more difficult to get into the appropriate ketosis than somebody who does not have cancer. Like you'd be able to get into the zone probably within 3 to 4 days.
What's that zone, Professor?
It's a glucose ketone index of 2.0 or below. Okay, we published this. It's a 2.0 or below zone. You can get in there. Water only fasting will bring you in real quick, but you suffer. It's not easy. You got to have tremendous motivation. We like to go zero carb diets. Like, okay, eat your filet mignon or your ribeye or whatever, lamb, pork, anything, chicken, and some vegetables that are low glycemic vegetables and things like this. As long as you eliminate or reduce significantly the amount of carbohydrates, your body slowly adjusts, and then you slowly raise ketones in your body. The blood sugar stays low, and then if you have cancer, the cancer cells now start to suffer. But it depends on the individual. So if that individual is really good, and then they go out and take some toxic chemo, all of a sudden the blood sugar goes up, or radiation makes the blood sugar go up because your body is now under threat. You're being poisoned, and your body is being treated with toxins. And in order for the body to respond, you elevate glucocorticoids, which is a stress hormone, elevating blood sugar, which is counterproductive to what we want to do to kill the tumor cells. So again, and then sometimes the oncologists throw out and give steroids to cancer patients. Well, steroids immediately raise blood sugar. So a lot of the things we do to treat these cancer patients is counterproductive. Of course you're going to get death of tumor cells if someone is poisoned and radiated. Of course there's going to be a lot of dead cancer cells as the result of standard of care treatments. But your body pays a significant price. Your hair falls out, your gums are bleeding, nausea, vomiting, malaise, all kinds of terrible side effects. And they could be permanent. Some of these, I don't know any human being that would just go down to an oncology center to get irradiated and treated with toxic poisons to improve their health. You know what I'm saying? You're not, somebody's going to say, they usually go to a spa and they get a massage and they sit and they get a nice bath. They don't go to a cancer center and say, give me some radiation and chemo to see if I can feel better. But yet when you have cancer, they do that to you. If you're a cancer patient, they use toxic radiation and poison and all this kind of stuff to make you, I'm trying to kill cancer cells, they say. Well, yeah, but they can't grow without glucose and glutamine. Why don't you use that? Oh, I never heard of that. What do you mean you never heard of it? You're supposed to know about the disease you're treating, right? Oh, I wasn't taught that in medical school. Well, they didn't give you the appropriate education then. They didn't treat you, they didn't educate you properly. And that's the other thing that unfortunately the physicians never heard of this. And then sometimes you hear these guys say, cancer cells, oh no, glucose is good for your body. You got to take a lot of sugar into your body when you have cancer to build up the strength. And they said glucose has nothing to do with dysregulated cancer growth. And then you say, don't you know Otto Warburg did some fundamental studies on this. And they say, I never heard of Otto Warburg. So, the lack of knowledge on the oncology field is so profound, which can explain why so many people worldwide are dying from cancer, miserable, horrific deaths, because the field has simply not come to know what I'm saying. And once they come to know and have an opportunity to look at the detailed evidence, the scientific evidence to support what I'm saying, they're all going to scratch their head and say, how come we didn't know about this? Well, I'm telling you now. Are you hearing what I'm saying? Okay. You understand what I'm saying? Yeah, well, this is the thing. I'm telling you, and people say, well, I never heard of that. Or it hasn't been repeated. What do you mean it hasn't been repeated? The scientific evidence is so strong to support what I'm saying. Well, I never read it. Well, you're supposed to read this kind of stuff. This is what you're supposed to do. But anyway, this is the problem. There's a lack of knowledge. Bottom line.
Yeah, and Professor, I know you may have the data for this, but how much more efficient is the metabolic treatments versus the standard of care treatments right now? Do you have any measurable data for
Well,
this?
I think we have to look at the outcome of treating
Yeah.
patients. There's three types of treatments you can have. You can have traditional standards of care. You can have standard of care blended with metabolic therapy, or you can have metabolic therapy alone. Okay, and the problem now is that there are some trials that are going on right now where standards of care are being used together with some aspects of metabolic therapy, but we're not having any serious investigations of metabolic therapy alone without toxic radiation and chemo. So we have to determine in time whether metabolic therapy, as we have described it and written and outlined the protocol, can have the outcome that standard of care, or have a better outcome than either standard of care by itself or standard of care blended with metabolic therapy. We need, and that's the future. The problem is right now we can't get. First of all, most of the oncology centers have no clue what I just told you. All right, they have never heard of what I'm saying, and those that have heard of it don't believe it, or feel that it's not going to be as effective without having any evidence. There's been no, and what's more, there have been trials that have been thrown together by some physicians that are not done correctly, by people who do not understand the foundational principles of what I'm saying. They just take somebody in and give them a bucket of lard, fat diet or something, and have them eat this and see what it does to your cancer. This is not done correctly. So you have to have a very foundational understanding of nutritional biochemistry, while at the same time measuring biomarkers to know whether invasive, non-invasive biomarkers to see how the tumor is responding. And what's more, when we treat patients, we tweak the systems differently. So every person is not given the same treatment. We watch them respond to what we're doing, and we tweak it one way or another, which then violates the tenets of what they call a clinical trial. These clinical trials are designed, the group gets this or nothing, or some placebo. We have to throw that out. That kind of a trial is not appropriate for metabolic therapy. The goal of metabolic therapy is to eliminate the tumor without toxicity, and we have to play at several different angles because everybody's metabolically different from everybody else. So we have to work, and the patient must become knowledgeable as well. The patient cannot be a bystander. They have to understand what we're doing and why we're doing what we're doing, and they play a major role in the outcome of success. So they're not just sitting there being treated by and hope for the best that you're going to recover or respond. No. They understand what we're doing, why we're doing, and they're helping the physician and the attending oncologist work together as a team. So again, this is a completely different kind of a strategy than what's currently being done. So we have to change a lot of the groundwork. We have to change a lot of the parameters that are currently being used, which can account. I mean, right now we have total failure on this thing. Even the people that survive standards of care oftentimes pay a terrible price. Their hormonal imbalances, bone density problems, neuropsychiatric problems, gut microbiome issues, all kinds of problems that now afflict them for the fact they survived toxic poisons and radiation. So again, we try to eliminate it. We want cancer patients to emerge from the therapy healthier than they were when they started. And now we're seeing that some of the cancer patients that have type 2 diabetes, hypertension, all these kinds of obesity and all this kind of stuff, that all goes away along with the cancer.
Yeah, I've seen some of Jeff DeProspero's videos on YouTube, and he always mentions that he feels better now than before he had cancer. He goes to the gym, he's
Yeah.
feeling amazing. And I also advise people that are trying to learn or in this situation to look at Jeff's videos, which are very important for understanding like how the patient goes through
Yeah.
all this process of metabolic the metabolic process. But
Yeah,
Professor,
right. Yeah, well,
uh,
Jeff is one guy. But if you look at the Cancer Revolution documentary series that's coming, they're collecting dozens of stage 4 terminal cancer patients that have done metabolic therapy and remain alive and healthy. So the field calls these anecdotes or flukes. They're not like part of a
yeah,
trial or anything like that. But how many
yeah.
anecdotes and flukes? Hundreds, thousands of flukes before we realize that this may be the way to go. I mean, I don't know. I mean, at some point, people are going to say, I want to go what those other guys are doing."
Yeah. And is there any place that people that have never heard of this theory that they can go and then they can find extensive material and deep studies or just like general general knowledge of what you're saying that they can find just in one place?
Yeah, well, my most of what I just told you is already published in the scientific literature, open access. So anybody with a computer can just put my name into Google and say publications, and then you'll see a lot of what I've said is already published. Now I know some of it's maybe scientifically deeper than what most people can understand, but anybody with some level of ability to read should be able to come away with a take-home message from some of this material.
Gotcha.
So it's there, and they can have someone help
Gotcha.
translate it if they need to have it done. But I try to write it in such a way that anybody with a reasonable level of scientific literacy can understand it. And because if people want to live, they got to understand this stuff. If they have cancer, it should not be viewed as a death sentence or some horrific punished way of existence. There's options to do this.
Okay. Sounds good. And does cutting out the carbs and so you said that cutting out the carbs makes it easier for people to get into nutritional ketosis. Does it make them? Is it risky for them to cut out the carbs and lack some nutrients? Is that a problem?
Well, I think cutting out our body does not need carbohydrate. Most of the brain usually uses a lot of carbs, and we take carbs and we store it as fat. Excess carbs are stored as fat. Let's put it that way. I don't think there's any harm. What was your question? Does it if the carbs are too low?
Yeah, my question was, for example, if you cut the carbs, does it put you in a risk of nutritional imbalance or poor
Um,
nutrition?
yeah, not for the carbs, but whatever you're eating, it should be balanced with macro and micronutrients. Um, with the macronutrient being carbohydrate is not essential. So
Yeah.
yes, yeah, carnivore diets and some organ meats. Like we people stop eating liver. People used to eat liver and kidneys a lot. They have a lot of nutrition. A lot of vitamins are stored in liver. So as long as you have a micro macronutrient balance, you can lower carbohydrates because the body can make small amounts of carbohydrates through the process of gluconeogenesis using amino acids. So our liver is capable of making some carbs, but the issue, of course, is it's very very low, and relative to a dietary source of carbohydrates. So and you have to burn energy to make energy from amino acids. So it's kind of an end game. You're not gaining any excess energy. You have to burn energy to configure the carbon backbones of amino acids into glucose. Which is then the gluconeogenesis. The liver can make, but the brain, its avid use of carbs sucks up most of the carbohydrates. Any little that would be there, they'll be mostly burning ketones, but what little carbohydrate the liver might produce will be immediately sucked up by the brain. So that would starve cancer cells, even if you have a tumor somewhere else, even if you have a brain tumor. The normal cells will be sucking down those carbs just as avidly as the tumor cells. In fact, The thing of it is our cells are hybrids. They can burn fatty acids, ketone bodies, amino acids, carbohydrates, whereas the cancer cell is locked into a carbohydrate glutamine fuel, which is an amino acid. And then, of course, people say to me, well, if I'm eating a lot of meat, will I elevate glutamine levels, causing the cancer to grow? And I'd say, well, you'd have to eat so much. You'd have to be like a lion to eat that much meat, because there's not that much free glutamine there. So, and don't forget, our immune cells need the glutamine as well. So, and our gut needs the glutamine. So, unless the person were to be taking a drink full of glutamine, then you would have to. I'm going to eat a big steak, and then I'm going to have a big glutamine solution to wash down the steak. Then I would think that would not be a good idea. But eating just meat with and it's also restricted, so you're not sitting down like a lion. You're eating a small amount of meat, or with vegetables, low glycemic vegetables. It's just that you're not taking in any foods that would have carbohydrates, like bananas and any kind of a treat or anything like that, or anything that would be a high glycemic index. Anything that would be like that would not be consumed.
It's nice that you mentioned about red meat, and I know that big cancer organizations, I'm not saying they're reliable, but I know they're big, like the ASCO and the ESMO. They say that eating too much red meat can increase the risk of cancers in the digestive system, such as colon cancer. And I think they believe this happens because red meat changes the gut bacteria or something like that and causes inflammation. It makes easier for cancers to develop. What's your opinion on this, Professor?
Well, I don't know about that, because most of those studies that I have seen, they're not eating just red meat. They got potatoes and bread and some other things in there too. They're not just eating a small amount of organic meat. None of those studies that I have seen are eating small amounts of organic meat. You have to realize that our ancestors in the Paleolithic period had to kill and eat animals to survive, whatever those animals were, wherever you existed. The Eskimos or Inuits of the Arctic regions ate almost all. Their diet consisted heavy of fish and meat, walruses and whatever they could eat. Very little vegetables and things like this. Our ancestors were we're omnivores. So meat allowed our brains to grow. Meat allowed us to survive. If we were vegetarians, you and I would never have this conversation. We would have been extinct. I think it has to do with I don't do research in those areas. All I know is that our ancestors evolved to eat meat, and wolves eat meat, but domestic dogs, which all come from wolves, are filled with cancer. They're eating processed foods, and I'm not. If you eat meat that's been treated or fed with hormones and unnatural situation, I'm not. I don't know if that would increase your risk for cancer. All I know, prevention. If you can keep your mitochondria healthy, it's going to be very difficult to get cancer. I don't care what you eat. If your mitochondria are healthy, you are slim. Don't forget, diabetes, or I should say obesity, has replaced smoking as one of the top risk factors for cancer. Are you telling me that a guy who's massively overweight and eating a steak every day and all this other stuff he's not at higher risk because he's eating the meat. He's at higher risk because he's fat with type 2 diabetes. So you have to break these things down and look at it the correct way. But wolves rarely, if ever, get cancer, and they're carnivores. Cats are obligate carnivores. Do we see cancer? Now, domestic cats, that might be, but cats in the wild, lions and tigers and all these kinds of things, ocelots and whatever else, anything eating its natural diet, cancer is usually very low. It's when you eat an unnatural diet. So if people say, well, eating a lot of red meat links to cancer, we also should recognize, is that natural red meat? Is it combined with anything other than the red meat? Let's break it down into those specific categories. But no, go back to your Paleolithic period. Our ancestors on the planet, these tribes living according to their traditional ways, cancer is very low in these tribes. So it's the Western diet and lifestyle, whether it's Brazil, whether it's America, whether it's Portugal, whether it's Italy, whether it's Spain, Germany, England, Japan, China. We're all eating highly processed carbs. We're not exercising as much. We're getting fat, and we're getting demented, and we're getting cancer. I mean, this is not a surprising thing, right? It's our diet and lifestyle that put us at risk for cancer, not eating a specific type of food. It's much more comprehensive than that.
Said, I understand it's a combination, and it's very clear from this conversation with us that if you do all of the things you're saying, then the probability of getting cancer should lower. Yeah. And is there any advice that you'd give to oncologists and researchers who are interested in exploring metabolic approaches for cancer treatment, just like you do, Professor?
Yeah, well, I would say they should start to understand what I'm saying, and also be very, very critical of what I'm saying, because the more you find evidence, I have not been proven wrong yet. Okay, and I offer my students a cash reward if they can show me any tumor cell that can survive without glucose and glutamine. They can't. Okay, so maybe what I'm saying is correct, because the science that I'm speaking about is 25 years, 30 years of research in the lab, looking at what Otto Warburg. Every oncologist should know what Otto Warburg said. Every oncologist should know that mitochondria are insufficient in producing energy through oxygen in all major cancers. And we're writing more and more papers proving that. Even though some cancer cells look like they're using oxygen, they're not using it for energy, they're using it to produce reactive oxygen species. And that's the other thing. Where did all these mutations come from in the cancer? They come from abnormal mitochondria producing reactive oxygen species, ROS, which are carcinogenic and mutagenic. So all the mutations that you see in cancers are all coming as downstream effects of the damage to oxidative phosphorylation. Oncologists should know this. They need to know how does smoking cause cancer? Damages OXPHOS. How does radiation cause cancer? Damages OXPHOS. Intermittent hypoxia damages OXPHOS. What about these oncogenic viruses? Papillomavirus, hepatitis C, they damage oxidative phosphorylation. What about older people? Damaged OXPHOS. Oxidative phosphorylation, OXPHOS. OXPHOS is oxidative phosphorylation. So clearly, we have linked it all. We have put together a package. We know what causes cancer. We know what causes dysregulation, and we know how to stop it. The problem is the rest of the world has not yet come to know this.
Are there any courses that they can do for the metabolic approach, Professor?
Yes. Our colleagues in Switzerland, Josephine Barbarino, are setting up metabolic therapy certifications so that physicians can become certified. This is still in the process of being developed, so physicians can go take coursework, understand what I'm saying. It's all laid out for them, and then they would be educated to know the best ways to treat cancer. And some of them may develop good hybrid systems between certain chemicals and metabolic therapy. I'm not stopping anybody from doing that. But I think they should know that that to stop cancer, you need to pull the plug on their fermentable fuels. So, and we have a major paper with over 40 authors, physicians and scientists, under review now. That's a very comprehensive treatment protocol for brain cancer, glioblastoma. But as I said, all these cancers are very much the same. They all rely on the same fermentable fuels. So we do glioblastoma because they haven't made any major advance in over 100 years. So if we're able to improve overall survival by 5 to 10-fold, it'll translate over into all kinds of cancers that we will eventually treat with a common non-toxic metabolic therapy.
Wow, wow, that's very, very impressive. And like you said, to treat people, and they go into nutritional ketosis. Are there any downsides of ketosis, Professor? That was my question.
Well, it's a very interesting. A paper just came out by our colleague Isabella Cooper from London, England, where she studied a number of women for many months, or years, that were in ketosis, and looked at all the health benefits. Don't forget, our Paleolithic ancestors were always in ketosis. They existed in ketosis. So Isabella's paper just came out. I'm one of the co-authors on that, and it shows how healthy these women were. And then they went back to eat Western diet and showed how unhealthy they became as soon as they started eating the Western diet. So it's unbelievable. So the problem today is that we are in an environment where so many foods are so tasty. All these fast foods, man, they are so tasty, and they're tempting. They're tempting. They were treats at one point in our existence, but now they've become the main staple for a lot of people. And what happens, a lot of people get obese. They have cardiovascular diseases, cancer, type 2 diabetes, all these kinds of things that were never part of our existence. And the idea is that we evolved to be lean and mean. We ate predominantly animals, and we would dig up plants. We'd eat anything. Don't forget, we're omnivores. That means we can eat anything that walks, crawls, swims, or flies on this planet. Human beings can eat it. So, but now we have all this highly processed carbohydrates, and we're getting fat and demented and all kinds of things. And the problem is that happened within the last 50, 75 years. And all these chronic diseases are exploding. And because we didn't evolve to eat this kind of crap. We were a lot of exercise and eat whatever was in your environment that would keep you healthy. And now we're paying the price. We're paying the price as far as our world health is concerned. And there's reports now to say that obesity has replaced starvation as a major source of health problem on the planet. Can you imagine that? That there's more fat people than starving people. I mean, this is from the worldwide transmission of food around the planet, all the highly processed farm materials and all this kind of stuff. So anyway, as long as we know about it, we have the power to interject. Get plenty of exercise. Don't get too freaked and stressed out. Eat small amounts of meat or vegetables, whatever you want to do, and keep your blood sugar down, and occasionally elevate ketones. And keeps your mitochondria healthy. Ketones are the elixir for mitochondria. When the mitochondria burn ketone bodies, they get healthy. They actually produce fewer reactive oxygen species. So, and as I said, you keep your mitochondria healthy, and you could probably prevent the majority of chronic diseases that we are currently afflicted with.
Wow. Yeah. And it's easy to see when you compare the Inuits, for example, how they are now and how they were 100 years ago, right? 100
Yeah.
years ago, they were probably eating mostly their predominantly diet, which was mostly a carnivore diet. And now that they eat foods brought from the West, then they're getting all the diseases that we've been getting for a while now, right, Professor?
Yeah, it's absolutely. In fact, I spoke to the physicians at Thunder Bay Medical School in Canada, which services the Inuits, and they are devastated by chronic diseases, type 2 diabetes, obesity, dementia, cardiovascular disease, cancer. And you're right, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, these folks were some of the healthiest people on the planet. they're eating seals and whales and fish and whatever. And don't forget, they're living in the Arctic. There's not too many grapefruits sitting around and oranges and that kind of thing. And you can do it with your own tribes in the rainforests. These guys were tough. You start giving them Big Macs and Taco Bell and all this kind of stuff, and the next thing you know, they're going to be fat, demented, full of cancer, and all this. That's the same thing. So it's clear. It's clear. It's absolutely clear. And don't forget, though, you have your choice. You can eat a big walrus steak, or you can have a nice Taco Bell with a McDonald's hamburger next to it. Tell me what most people will go for. Big jelly-filled donut to go on top of that. I mean, give me a break. Big pizza, all of these things are very logical once you understand the biology and biochemistry of the situation.
Yeah, I see that. And Professor, to finalize this conversation, are there any next steps for your research that you plan to do to improve or just
Well,
to
yeah.
look at
Well,
different things about the metabolic theory?
yeah. Well, we're looking right now. We're working on dosage, timing, and scheduling, which is optimization of metabolic therapy. What's the base? What's the dosage of the drugs we use with diets? When should we administer this? How often? And this kind of thing. And we're studying that. Also, on a deeper level, we're looking at mechanistic activities of mitochondria, how mitochondria are actually able to ferment. What's it called? Mitochondrial substrate level phosphorylation. It's the mechanism by which mitochondria can also ferment. And that's what happens. They lose their ability to respire, but they can still produce energy through a fermentation mechanism. And we're looking into that, better defining that. We know it happens. We just need to ferret it out a little bit more. So we're doing a lot of things, and we're supported entirely by philanthropy and private foundations. So and as I said, Travis Christofferson's Foundation for Metabolic Cancer Therapies, my Boston College biology website. People make donations to our lab through the university or through the private foundations, and it'll happen. It's going to happen. We just have to educate people to know what's going on. Not only the lay people will make a push, because they're the ones ultimately that are going to benefit the most from metabolic therapy. So people with cancer, if they want to live and they don't want to be brutalized by toxic poisons and things, they'll have to eventually want metabolic therapy and demand metabolic therapy from the major medical schools, and eventually things will change, because you guaranteed this will become the standard of care at some point in the future. But again, the word needs to get out, the theory needs to change, and then you're going to see a major change in dropping death rates and reducing suffering from all what's happening now.
Well, Professor, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate all your knowledge that you've brought to me and to my public as well. And I do hope that this interview is going to reach a lot of people and that your work, as time goes on, gets passed by and looked onto more people. I love it. Thank you so much, Professor.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Antonio.